That's a big crowd. Uh, um, well, I guess if it's a very small crowd, I'll still do the talk. It's just going to be a bit more informal rather than formal or whatever. My slides are still pretty informal anyway. But basically, what we're here to do is I'll talk a little bit about how to build an art marketplace in Web3. And it goes a little bit, not only how to build it, but basically like how the journey looks like. Because in a couple of days, it marks 3 years since we started building that art marketplace called Sloika. And in 2 days from now, we are shutting down. So it's kind of like a bit of a journey from like the very beginnings to the end, lessons learned, and kind of like what might be next. Well, so first of all, I guess, for people who are in Web3, they know the difference between Web2 and Web3. And Web2 is kind of like, consumer-based, how you use Flickr, how you use Instagram. You post, advertisers make money off the ads. And Web3 is a little bit kind of like weird, decentralized, fun. But more importantly is that before starting this company, I was building a photo licensing platform. And in photo licensing, for most people, if you ever buy photo stock images, the photographer or the artist gets at most 20%. The rest 80% goes to the company. It means feeding lawyers, feeding salespeople, feeding whoever else, but not the artists. So artists get 20%. In Web3, the whole idea, the whole process was that you can actually flip this equation. And artists, photographers can get 80%, in some cases a lot more, in some cases maybe slightly less, but kind of like make it more funky and more equitable towards the artist. So that's the whole idea why Web3 has this potential. We'll see. The second thing is that the big difference is between centralized, obviously, and decentralized. So with centralized, meaning when you use Flickr or Facebook or any other services, Instagram, those are basically our own servers. They're controlled. So if the policy changes, if the privacy changes, that is on the company. And as we've seen in the past, usually companies try to, they start very generous and then they start tightening the balls. They're like, okay, you guys are okay with this, we'll tighten it a little bit further. With the decentralized approach, that was the premise of Web3, there's an ability to actually have connections that are not controlled by the company or by the platform. That's how it began. So photographers, I see some photographers in the audience, would actually talk directly to collectors and would make those deals, which then can be facilitated on the platform and on the platform or off the platform. So it kind of like makes a big change on how it's built. The disadvantage for the platforms is that if it's truly decentralized, then the platform is kind of like less needed than before. So, like, do we need us, basically, or we're making us obsolete by making it more and more decentralized? So that was kind of like one of the questions. How the platforms were created in the last 3 years or so is that there are specialized platforms, including ours, including others like Foundation, and there are generic platforms such as OpenSea and Rarible. What it means is that regardless of the assets that you're buying or selling, whether it's game assets, whether it's profile picture NFTs, there is a generic marketplace. It's not very specialized for that. And the specialized ones, like ours, decided that there's a niche enough to focus on the arts. And when focusing on the arts, there's an opportunity to actually serve the market a little bit better. Simple example is that photographers like high quality. So we just want to have higher resolution images, larger images compared to smaller stamps, as you can see on OpenSea, for example. So the idea is that over time, you can serve the audience better by having more specific features. And so it branches off the total market. And instead of having like serving the total market of however many hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars during the hype market, that are specialized, that are basically focusing like us on a niche. And we started by focusing on photography very, very specifically, whereas a few others might be focusing a little bit wider on the graphic arts, for example, as a category. But what's been happening, kind of like in the last 2 years or so, is that, well, first of all, I spend a lot of time on this graph. This is the same graph, but just on a side instead of taking two, is that we saw decline of the platforms and we saw the rise of memes. And in terms of the decline of the platforms, there's a lot of ways to look at the data. So whether you're looking at OpenSea, whether you're looking at our platform, whether you're looking at a lot of other NFT platforms in general, the volumes have been down approximately 90 to 99%. That's kind of like one thing to figure out for the business is kind of like how do you make money if your liquidity dries up? Like where do you get the customers? Where do you get it? And that is a very tough question for the business. So like we made our choices. But what happened in the meantime is that there was a rise in memes. And a rise in memes happened in the meme coin market. And I argued with somebody earlier today is that meme coins basically replaced what NFTs used to be for people. So instead of buying an NFT and waiting for the value to go up and trading that, it's just got replaced by a meme coin that you buy and trade without the intermediary. And in this case, the intermediary was the artist. Some meme coins kind of like just go straight to the source in that case. So there's also kind of like a little bit of a way to look at the market. And the way that kind of like I looked at that, there's open market and there's a curated market. And obviously in the curated market, you can see super rare, and in the open market, you can see marketplaces like OpenSea. But there's also a way in how approach to whether you get the reach as an artist. So on OpenSea, the algorithm and the curatorial are basically not letting you be on the front page unless you have, I guess, a connection, unless you have any deals or you're trending. There's also more direct reach where platforms are basically looking at, are basically allowing you to look directly with the collector, and what you're doing is consistent and or popular, then there's no algorithm to kind of like punish you for doing that. And so kind of like what we've seen again in the last 3 years is a big change from who've been here early enough in NFTs. You know, we started with like rare one-on-ones, so kind of like additional one, which almost disappeared from the market. So it went from the one-on-ones to limited editions and then to free editions, and kind of like next step is actually subsidized editions. So instead of actually having free edition where you pay gas, the next stage and the next approach to that is that the creator or the platform, depending on the choice of that, actually will subsidize for you to take that NFT into your wallet. So that's kind of like a big gap. I guess that's why, you know, these two pictures are there. It's a big gap from going from absolutely killing that in 2021 for the artists selling one-on-ones to actually recognizing that majority of the market and actually majority of the money have shifted towards a very different model. And so kind of like lastly, next to last slide, is how we see the future of the art market, kind of like talking a little bit about the past, is that there is 4 major things as I think of that towards the creator and towards the market itself. So first of all is the creative control. A lot of the artists are saying, I would say like saying no to a particular platform and instead becoming a platform themselves. So they're not using you know, like our platform or Foundation or Manifold or all the other platforms that exist today, but actually keeping control to themselves and using that to you know, divide and like offer specific art pieces to their collectors. The second is that the marketplace is actually not a market anymore, and we've seen the rise of that. Like one example would be Manifold, where it becomes kind of like a platform to serve and create, but not necessarily market for you. So you're the marketer, and for that you basically get yourself more money instead of paying a commission. The third one is no algorithms. I think we've seen in the past, great example is X, aka Twitter. The algorithms and everything that's being pushed is in a way excessive. And so if you're in a particular, again, I talked to a nude photographer yesterday, she has no reach, because as soon as you put anything new that's getting flagged, Twitter doesn't like you. If you put something like this on Instagram, Instagram doesn't like you. So for very specific pieces of art, it works, but for majority of the people that are dealing with photography, people that we deal with photographers, with artists, the no algo is the best algo, right? And lastly is the abundant experimentation. So not to be particularly set in a way of like, let's do X and never do Y, but instead be very, very open to trying new things on different platforms and different blockchains, and how it basically relates to your art. One example is that you can still have your rare 101s, which may or may not sell in this market, but you also have the free/subsidized mints on some very, very random blockchain, because that blockchain might have a great marketing activity. So basically kind of like being open to that. And that is basically how the market or the marketplace have to reinvent itself if somebody's going to be building that in the future. And so for us, as I mentioned, kind of like for us, it's a bit of a sad moment, because we're, after 3 years of building that, we are calling it quits. So we learned a lot by building the marketplace, by working with over 1,000 collectors, by working with over 1,500 different artists. And we realized that this is kind of like the experimentation thing. Like you start with an easy and excitement path, and we all fell a little bit in the disillusionment in the middle, where it's like really, really hard to get out and see the light in the end of the tunnel. And so what I'm realizing is that for the markets and marketplaces to reinvent themselves, they have to become, in a way, like omni-channel. So instead of dealing with like, oh, we are on Ethereum, or like, oh, which blockchain you use, or like, oh, is it my smart contract or is it someone else's smart contract? Instead, it's kind of like a little bit of everything, and it goes in stages where something works today and it will probably stop working in a few months from now, because there's going to be a hot, new, shiny thing that's happening a few months from now. So kind of like it requires not only the reinvention of the market, but it also requires of understanding the psychology of people that want to introduce new things and want to experiment and want to make it kind of like hyped in a way in order to attract more collectors' attention. Yeah, that's it for me. Open for questions, or we'll wrap it up. Mike. Cool, thank you.